Okay, so fine. Despite my complaining that Ultron came out of absolutely nowhere at the end of the previous episode, yes, it was going somewhere, and pretty much everybody told me that from the offset. I don't know if that was just confirmed at the time it came out, or if it was assumed as much, but yeah, that ended up being the case. So technically now it counts as a setup for what comes next. So, what if Ultron won? This one is honestly more interesting for its impact on the overall thing that What If is than as a story in and of itself. Because, I mean, ultimately, the plotline of What If X villain won just means they won. Granted, in the case of Ultron, we see him win and then scale up everything. Gets his plan to work on Earth in terms of wiping out pretty much every living thing, and then moves on to other planets. That's logical. He's still going to need something to do unless he decides to just shut himself down like the Terminator was supposed to do after it killed Sarah Connor, apparently. But the fact that that Ultron has this much of a drive, yeah, if he found a way to get to other universes, he would jump on that. And that brings us to the Watcher finally having to get involved very forcefully. I was actually a little bit annoyed that the Watcher doesn't really choose to get involved. He comes very close to getting directly involved when Clint and Natasha are looking for information, but he doesn't. So it is a little annoying to me just in terms of the character agency that basically interfering was something thrust upon him as opposed to a decision that he made that he would have to worry about the consequences of. Here, he already knows if he does nothing, the end result is going to be worse than almost anything that could happen from him doing something. And then him linking up with Doctor Strange at the end makes total sense, given that Doctor Strange up to this point was the only other being that perceived him the way Ultron did. And in terms of the Ultron story specifically, it's nice that they accounted for the fact that the Vision body was originally supposed to be Ultron's, so that followed. That makes sense. It was interestingly swift, him taking out Thanos and getting the full Infinity Gauntlet. I went back and forth, like, was that too easy for how powerful Thanos should have been? The thing is, Thanos didn't know who that was, had absolutely no idea in terms of what he was capable of, and that hit was so swift, without reaction time to make use of the stones. It's not like the stones are a force field. You have to actually be using them to do a thing. So that was quick enough that, you know what? Yeah, I buy it. That said, the way Ultron, quote-unquote, uses the stones after that kind of actually brought into sharp relief that the Infinity Gauntlet as a thing is hard to use properly, and it's been very smart how the MCU has used it up to this point. What I mean by that is, theoretically, the Infinity Gauntlet can do basically anything. Between all the stones, it can manipulate time, space, reality, all these things, and yet, ultimately, all it seems to be for Ultron is, well, effectively an invincibility star from Mario. It just makes him super powerful in a very generic way, and he just uses it to fire blasts. That kind of really started to hit me when he got in the fight with the Watcher. I'm like, dude, you could literally freeze time on him right now, and you're not. You could turn this entire reality inside out, and you're not. You're just blasting energy at him, which I suppose you kind of have to do, because that's the thing about the Infinity Gauntlet. If you have it, you kind of win. That's what happens. That's why the MCU had to, in its depictions up to this point, have Thanos use it so briefly, and why it was actually super essential in Endgame that the entire thing was about reassembling it after Thanos destroyed it, and then it gets used again really only once after that, because it is so overpowered, you really have to find a way to limit people's ability to use it. Because once they have it, they can do anything. So the fact that Ultron had it, but still was just firing blasts around, did start to annoy me. And I think I was just supposed to overlook it because I was supposed to be going, oh no, over the fact that he was threatening the entire multiverse, except I guessed that already just based off the teaser previously that he was jumping universe to universe. So yeah, again, it's not the end of the world. It's just uninventive, and it kind of highlighted for me how carefully the MCU deployed the Infinity Gauntlet previously. I can't remember if the Gauntlet is handled as intelligently as the films did in the comics. I feel like they mostly did, but I haven't read everything the Infinity Gauntlet has shown up in, so I don't know. So this obviously sets us up for a bigger confrontation. Now, I'll be curious to see, I would expect, actually, for the Watcher to gather up other people to help from the other episodes of What If. Not necessarily all of them, but I fully expect, say, Captain Carter to show up at the end. I fully expect to see the Star-Lord version of T'Challa show up and help fight Ultron. Maybe Killmonger? Tougher call on that one. I'm writing off Party Thor because it looked like his place has just gotten invaded, so he's toast. And like maybe they will literally just throw zombies at him. Who knows? So I imagine that it's not going to be just Doctor Strange being pulled in for the next one. They'll pull in elements from the other stuff so that it feels more like a culmination, even though it was all pretty self-contained up until this particular episode. As far as the rest of what went on, the stuff with Natasha and Clint was pretty good. They did a decent job of justifying why they're still around when everybody else is gone, because they're the two without superpowers. But, you know, if they were off ground and like just, I don't know, sufficiently over the ocean to be out of the blast range of the nukes that went off, yeah, okay. I mean, theoretically, that should mean anyone who is in a plane over an ocean is also still alive. But then again, you have to know where you're going to land, avoid radiation, all this other stuff. So, you know, maybe not too many others would have kept surviving after that. But the banter between them is pretty good. The voice actress, again, for Natasha, does a good job of channeling Scarlett Johansson's portrayal, so it works well enough. And the chemistry between her and Clint was good. It was interesting that they kind of evoked that moment of Natasha, you know, forcing Clint to let her go so that he could get the Soul Stone, with Clint here forcing Natasha to let him go so that she's not slowed down and has Zola with her. Using Zola was, I mean, that's an interesting solution. And I guess it is one of those things that comes up in espionage type things, analog versus digital technology, and that as powerful as digital is, it's not very good at combating analog technology because it works on a completely different basis. So I guess it kind of works. I'm not sure if I buy Zola being able to totally take... Well, I mean, I have to. That's just the premise. But, like, I'm not sure that general principle of analog is difficult for digital to account for, it therefore follows that Zola can beat Ultron. Whatever. It's fine. It's fine. It works well enough. They got Toby Jones back. Unfortunately, the voice for Ultron wasn't bad, but I think the problem here is that, well, first of all, James Spader playing Ultron, it was just the voice that he was doing before, so everything about that character was the voice. So, like, compared to when I've noted things about, like, say, Sebastian Stan playing Bucky, it's off in his performance because normally when he performs it, he brings all this other stuff to it on the screen, you know, in his physicality, facial expressions, and he's used to having all that. But the performance we had for Ultron was always only the voice. So somebody else who isn't James Spader trying to bring everything James Spader was funneling into his voice to do that, again, it's passable. But James Spader had such a commanding voice, and his performance was one of the reasons I actually really like Ultron as a villain, despite that the Age of Ultron movie not being great or really pulling together. So that was a little bit of a disappointment. The guy they got, Ross Marquand, I believe, he was the same guy they got to impersonate Red Skull when Red Skull came back in Infinity War. Now, honestly, that worked out better there, but that's where I'm going to note one of the little quirks of voice acting, which is that it's much easier to impersonate someone else's put-on voice than it is their natural voice. And what I mean by that is when Hugo Weaving played the Red Skull, he had a fake accent because Hugo Weaving's Australian, he's not German. So it's easier to imitate a voice that somebody else had to already create and fake. Because if they could, put on that voice and fake those just manners of speech and those nuances of vocalization, then so can any sufficiently trained voice actor with a similar voice range. But trying to get as good an imitation of someone's natural speaking voice, that's just the way they talk, that is much harder. And it's kind of illustrated here because when Ross Marquardt voiced Red Skull, it's almost been seamless how good he is at imitating Hugo Weaving's voice work as Red Skull. But here you kind of see like you're trying to talk the way somebody isn't putting on a voice. Ultron's voice was processed or whatever, but the performance, it was just James Spader. That's just him. That's just how he talks. And they just ran it through like some reverb and stuff. So trying to imitate that, even with the assistance of adjusting the little details digitally after the fact, it's not quite there, which is a shame. Again, because like I said, I actually like Ultron as a villain, and so losing Spader's voice is a little bit of a loss. It doesn't really impact the story, but it is a little bit of a for me. But it does a good job of setting up the size and scope of the threat of Ultron. Apparently, it's required to have a cape if you take over the universe. I don't know. That seemed like a weird affectation. That like, I have all these stones, all this power, I need a cape. So that was a little odd. But yeah, it's fine. Ultron can have quirks. But I'm not sure I have too much more to say about it. As a story in and of itself, it was not super unpredictable. It was pretty much what it said on the tin, and having anyone who has paid attention to how the Watcher had been used up to this point, you figured he's going to have to step in or will be in this ultimately forced into the story at a later point. This is where it happens, and it sets up for a big confrontation at the end. I'll be curious to see how that pans out. I mean, imagine it's just going to be largely a big crossover mashup, which, I mean, will be fun. It'll be a spectacle. I'm not sure how much more it can be than that, but, I mean, we'll see when we get there. Did anyone else think it was weird hearing the Watcher in that, commanding, authoritative, almost stoic voice go, "What the hell?" Anyone else find that weird? I mean, maybe it was supposed to be like a bit of a breaking moment or whatever. I don't know. I don't think it landed right. Anyways, what if Ultron won? What'd you think about this one? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Like, share, subscribe. I have a Patreon. That's how I pay my bills. But no pressure on that. All the other stuff I mentioned helps me out as well. Maybe hit the bell if you feel like it, but don't sweat it too much. We take a relaxed attitude around here, so just come on back next time you need a break. This video wouldn't have been possible without the support of my patrons, and I want to give special thanks to Jared Boyce, MJ, The Doctor, Tracy Scrabbit, Vincent Paul Bartolucci, Caitlin Schwartz, Edelon, Robin Moore, Ross Schultz, and Shayla Gorley. Thanks so much.